Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, and welcome to the Fitness Center. How are we all doing this evening? Fantastic. A beautiful evening in downtown Hamilton, Ohio. My name is Ian Mackenzie Thurley. I'm the Executive Director here at the Fitness Center. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all this evening for a fantastic and very special event for us all. With that, I would like to thank the Hamilton Community Foundation, the City of Hamilton, Arts Wave in Cincinnati, and the Ohio Arts Council for their incredible support of the arts here in Hamilton and throughout the great state of Ohio. Please do put your hands together for them. We have brand new sponsors this evening. Our event sponsor for this evening is Aetna. You would have seen them out there in the front. So thank you so much to Aetna for our sponsors for this evening. First-time sponsors here at the Fitness Center. To all of our sponsors, we really appreciate it. But let me give you a little précis of the day here. It started this morning at 4:30. We opened the doors. 4:30 this morning to do live television on stage. Then we swapped over teams at 9 o'clock. Our events and outreach team got everything together and put it in a van and went out to Liberty Township to do the Easter egg hunt. As they were coming back in, we had our team in the galleries taking out art from the Women's Art Club of Hamilton. And as they were getting packed up, we had a Ukrainian egg dyeing workshop going down in our basement. And then in the evening, we just do a little sold-out show and have some fun. That is one day at the Fitness Center. If you're looking to thank you. If you're looking to support a community organization, we'd like to think you to think of us. Please see our good friend Arnita Gunn. She'll be able to talk you through about everything we've got coming up in our upcoming season. Speaking of incredible community organizations, we'd like to give a big shout out and welcome to our partners over there in beautiful Fairfield, just down the road at the Joe Nuxel Miracle Fields. We've got the Nuxel family here. Board members, Ty and the family is here as well. Talk about an incredible legacy of that name and of that family and building their own legacy as that name goes forward. We really appreciate everything you do for our community and everybody within it. Thank you so much. Great to have you here. We really appreciate it. And a huge thank you to the Reds Hall of Fame. This is our second big event with the Hall of Fame. A few years ago, we had an incredible art exhibition, all that brilliant art from the walls and the annals of the Hall of Fame on our walls here at the Fitness Center. We really do appreciate it. To Rick Walls and his team and my good friend Sherry. Where is Sherry? I put it somewhere. Sherry Rowland, who has helped me put all of this together. And I say all of this because you talk about a chain of events. I'm going to try and tell a really quick story because I know you came to hear about me and what I did at spring training this year. In fact, Marty and I are going to share spring training stories. I have one. I'm working on it. I got a few years. So anyway, Sherry used to work here at the Fitness Center, and she came to a show and she said, "Hi, my name's Sherry. I used to work here at the Fitness Center before me." I said, "Where do you work now?" She said, "I work at the Hall of Fame for the Cincinnati Reds." I'm like, oh my God, I was so excited. My eyes were like this. So I went down to the Hall of Fame. She gave me this incredible tour. We looked at everything and I said, "You have nice art. Can I have it?" And they said yes. And we got it. And then we walked past and there was the banana phone. She goes, "Well, this is the banana phone." And I went, ring, ding, 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 banana phone. I said, "I have called the banana phone from London, England." And that is the first time that Marty and I met. And when I recalled this story, he goes, "Oh, I absolutely remember you." But from little things, big things grow, and our partnership there with the Hall of Fame has been strong ever since, and we really appreciate that, and the Cincinnati Reds. Obviously, we have a great connection to the Reds here in Hamilton. This is season number 25 for me. I'm looking for hardware. I'm looking for silverware. I'm looking for some rings at the end of this year. So I'll see everybody at the parade come November. This is the year. We're going to do this one, so I'm excited about that. So we really do appreciate everything to bring this all together. We use the word legend a lot these days, but there really is, when you are a legend, you're a voice, you're a known entity, but when you are the sound of a whole season, that when you turn on that radio and you hear those voices of Marty and Joe, and instantly you're transformed, instantly you're taken back, and instantly you're in a ballpark. And watching a game is fantastic, and seeing on television is fantastic. It's great to be there in the energy, but it's a very different thing to hearing it on the radio. It's intimate. it's one-on-one. You can't see a thing, so they have to describe everything to you. So those voices are built into your head year after year. I had the same thing growing up in Australia, and you talk to anybody where they grew up, those voices of sport, particularly on the radio, take them back to a time instantly and becomes part of their soul, part of a culture. And we certainly have that here in Greater Cincinnati and Hamilton. And with that, it gives me great pleasure to welcome to the fitness stage the legend himself, Mr. Marty Brennaman.
How are we looking? Everybody good? You know, after a half a century, I finally have my night in the theater. And this is a little unnerving. I mean, I've never done anything like this. When Ian came to me months ago, and he and Sherry Rowland and all the folks here at the Fitness Center have been absolutely incredible and proposed this type of night with you folks. And I thought, you know what, I've never done anything like that. I'm going to tell you things about my life that you've never heard before. And I mean, most of the stuff you've heard over and over and over again relative to the game of baseball. But I look forward to this. The first part will be reminiscing about where I came from and my family and how I got to where I am today. And the second part, after an intermission, will be Amanda will join me up here, and you'll have a chance during the intermission to put questions if you have any questions you want to ask me. And the second part of the evening will be devoted to the questions and answers that you may have that maybe I didn't cover in this first part. You know, I told Amanda I've gone over a million things about what I'm going to talk about as far as my life is concerned, when she said, you know, one thing is consistent with you is you get way too wordy. And so she said, just, you know, figure out what you want to talk about and then be as concise as you can while at the same time not missing anything. I said, you know how hard that is for me? I was born in Portsmouth, Virginia. I'm going to take you back now because to be precise, at 5:30 in the morning on July 28, 1942 at Parrish Memorial Hospital. I was the second child for my mom and dad. The first boy was stillborn, born in 1939. His name they named him Fred, and he was gone when he came. And so I was the first of what would be a two-boy family. And my mom and dad were very middle class. They both worked all their lives. They never owned a home. We lived in apartments. My mom worked for the telephone company. My dad was a manager of a pet milk company in Virginia, and I went to public schools. I guess you could say this was the beginning of some type of decision, not aware at the time, that I was going to get into some type of entertainment, because when I was 8 years old, I started taking drama lessons. And I had a private teacher. And I went once a week, and I went for 8 years. And I also entertained service clubs, Rotary clubs, a Kiwanis club, as a kid, because I'm sure many of you remember Andy Griffith. Andy Griffith, back in the old days, he, as it turned out, he and I are both alumnus of the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And Andy, when he was in school there, had he did a series of dissertations or bits of comedy in front of groups that had to do with a country boy discovering football for the first time, and it was called What It Was Football. And I memorized that thing, and I went around to Rotary clubs and Kiwanis clubs and performed like a trained monkey, and so from that, I went into being heavily involved in the theater when I was in high school. Did not play any sports. I went out as a freshman for football, and I weighed 95 pounds, and I was a quarterback. And toward the middle of preseason practice, the coach, who became a dear friend of mine later on, a guy by the name of Bill Strawn, called me in and said, "Marty, we're going to have to cut you." And I guess inwardly I was thrilled. but I wasn't about to quit. I said, well, you don't think I can play? He said, I'm not so much concerned about your ability to play as I am the possibility that you're going to get killed out there. He said, so I'm going to do you a favor and do your mom and dad a favor, and you're off the team. Okay, fine. So I got more involved in theater, and I did a lot of high school theater work. And then later on, toward the end of my high school career, before I went off to college, I did summer stock with a little theater in Portsmouth, Virginia. But the highlight of my acting career in high school, I was the star of the senior class play. The title of the play was A Remarkable Incident at Carson Corners. And it dealt with a lot of flashbacks. It dealt with a kid being killed because of negligence in high school, and they had flashbacks. And the last scene of the play, I had this long oration, 5 minutes, and it was completely memorized. I had to go off stage and change from one coat to another, and they had turned the lights in the auditorium completely off. And so I came back onto the stage with the lights still off. I misdirected myself. I stepped into the footlights and fell 15 feet into the orchestra pit. And so back then, I hate to say this because it's the most insidious addiction that there is to man, and that's smoking cigarettes, but I was smoking in high school. And when I was stunned, and when I looked up into the eyes of my best friend. And my best friend, a fellow by the name of Butch Beal, the first thing I said to him, Butch, go get those cigarettes out of my coat in the dressing room. And so years later, the woman who directed the show was a tremendous, one of probably the most popular and favorite teachers I had in high school, named Mary Jo Brady. And she was married to a Navy man. And years later, they were stationed in the Middle East, and they were in the Officers Club. And they were thrown together with a young couple, and they were talking about their travels and the things they had seen. And the young woman said, well, when I was dating Jimmy, we were stationed in Norfolk, Virginia, and we went to a show one night, and we saw this kid fall off a stage. Honest to God. They talk about small worlds. So then I got out of school. I wanted to go to North Carolina. I didn't have the grades to get into it. So I went to a small school, Randolph-Macon College, which is north of Richmond. And I transferred in my junior year to Carolina because I wanted to major in communications. Not so much ending up doing what I'm doing now. I had not developed that decision yet, but I knew I wanted to get into broadcasting in some capacity. And so I transferred in my junior year to Carolina and majored in communications and did a little work on the Carolina Basketball Network my senior year. And then, meantime, I had 2 kids while I was in Carolina. My first wife, Brenda, was a sister of one of my fraternity brothers at Randolph-Macon College. And my son, Tom, was born at University Hospital. And then 15 months later, my daughter, my oldest daughter, Dawn, was born there. At which point my dad said, when they were 15 months apart, do you know where they come from? I said, I got you covered. So when I graduated, I couldn't find a radio job, and I got a job in TV in High Point, North Carolina, at Channel 8, ABC station. And I did morning news, and then I would fill in for the sports director when he was off on some other assignment. And I was there for 6 months. And I got a call one day from a guy that owned a small radio station in Salisbury, North Carolina, and I had been recommended to him by the guy who was the voice of the Carolina Tar Heels, a guy by the name of Bill Curry, who worked out of Charlotte. And he recommended me to this fellow on this station in Salisbury to broadcast high school and college, small college football and basketball and American Legion baseball. And so I took the job, and it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me because they weren't paying me enough to be good, and I sure as heck wasn't good at the beginning. But I had so much of an opportunity to work and do baseball games and do basketball games, do football games, and I was there for 5 years. And I turned down a job in Charlotte at WBT Radio. They were They carried the Davidson College games, and this is back when Lefty Driesell coached at Davidson, and they were a national ranked top 10 team every year. Because I turned it down because I knew the guy who was there, a fellow by the name of Jim Thacker, was never going to leave. And no matter how long I might have been at the station, I would always be number 2 in command. So I turned it down. People thought I was crazy. And then a short time later, this team out of Washington, D.C., the Washington Nationals in the Old American Basketball Association, moved out of Washington and into what is referred to as the Tidewater area of Virginia. Although it was a regional franchise because they played in Norfolk and they played in Hampton, they played in Richmond, and they played in Roanoke. Most of the games were played in Norfolk and Hampton. And long story short, I got the job. And that enabled me then to do 3 years of AAA baseball in Norfolk. The New York Met AAA club, the Tidewater Tides, were there. And so I got a chance to do professional baseball for the first time after doing a lot of American Legion ball, because Carolina is a hotbed for Legion baseball for high school kids. They will play upwards of 50 or 55 games every summer. And it was a really good brand of young baseball. And so, funny things happen. I believe in irony and how one decision can impact another decision. Had I taken the job in Charlotte, probably I would have never gone to Virginia, and as a result, may have never ended up in Cincinnati. Because by that point in my career, I knew I wanted to be a play-by-play guy. I didn't want to be a Dennis Jansen or a George Vogel or somebody like that did sports at 6 and 11 o'clock every night, and they had 3 minutes to do sports. I wanted to be a guy who was on the scene and had a chance to broadcast games. Not so much did I think about baseball, because I was so enamored with the professional basketball and traveling the country. And I was fortunate to be on a broadcast for a team that had 3 of the great players in the history of the game come through there. First, Charlie Scott, who was the first black player to play at the University of North Carolina, was a 2-time All-American and a great pro. Then Julius Erving, who came from the University of Massachusetts, acquired the nickname Dr. J, and then George Gervin. And they all came through there while I was there. But then one day I got a call from the general manager of the AAA club in Norfolk, a fellow by the name of Dave Rosenfield, God rest his soul. And he said, this was in '73, and he said, I just came away with a meeting in Houston where the baseball winter meetings were held in November of '73. And I just ended up a conversation with a fellow by the name of Dick Wagner, who was the assistant general manager of the Reds. And it was just a chance meeting. There was no purpose behind this meeting other than crossing paths and recognizing each other and standing around and chatting. And in the course of the conversation, Dick told Dave, we lost one of our play-by-play guys, and we're looking for a guy. And Dave said, I recommended you for the job. And I said, okay. I wasn't overly thrilled about it then. And I said, well, what do I have to do? He said, you have any kind of audition tapes? I said, yeah, I got a tape of a game I did between the Tides and the Rochester Red Wings in Rochester. And he said, he gave me the information. He said, send it to him. So I sent it to him, and I essentially forgot it. I was in the midst of traveling with a basketball team, and about 2 weeks later, I got another call, and this was from the Reds. A fellow by the name of Roger Rule called. And Roger was the director of marketing, and he said, we got your tape, and we'd like for you, if you could send us 2 or 3 commercials that you can do, and also do an interview with somebody. If you have one, send that along so we can hear that side of your work also. And I said, sure. So I sent it off. And in Norfolk, they had a minor league hockey team that was in the same league as the Cincinnati Swords. And the guy that covered the hockey for the Norfolk newspaper also covered the baseball. So he and I were very good friends. And he would travel into Cincinnati periodically anytime the Norfolk team came in to play the Swords. And he came back the second time, and he said, I thought you might be interested in some information. I said, what would that be? He said, my sources tell me that you're still on the list. And I said, what list? And he said, the list for the broadcasting job for the Reds. And I said, really? He said, yeah. I said, you know how many people are on the list? And he said, no, but I know you're still on the list. I said, well, if you hear anything else, let me know. And now we're in the month of December. And so a short time later, I get a call from the ball club one day. And I hear these three guys, and I hear laughing in the background, all of them acting like a bunch of fools. And it turned out it was Dick Wagner and Jim Winters, who was the director of broadcasting, and Roger Rule. And they said, we'd like to bring you into Cincinnati for an interview for this job. And I said, you're kidding. And they said, no, we're serious. And he said, can you get here? I said, yeah. I said, I've got to be in Indianapolis on, January 18th to do a game between the Pacers and the Squires, and I can come in early to Cincinnati, and then I can go away on to Indianapolis. He said, fine. So I came into Cincinnati on a Thursday night, and they took me to the Masonette for dinner. If they would try to impress me, they did. And so, I was born at night, but not last night. I know what this whole deal was. I know it's a face-to-face interview, and we had a nice dinner. And as the dinner was breaking up, they said, we'd like to bring you to Riverfront Stadium tomorrow and meet Mr. Howsam. And then we'll talk to you after the meeting. I said, okay. So that morning, Gordy Coleman, God rest his soul, who was the head of the Speakers Bureau, picked me up, took me to the stadium. I met Bob Howsam, spent 25, 30 minutes with him. And then I went over to Wagner's office with the big three there, and they said, we really like your work. And they told me then, they said, you should know that when we brought you here, the list had been narrowed to three, and you were one of the three. And that you were the only minor league announcer among the three. The other two were big league broadcasters. I found out later one was Monty Moore, who was the voice of the Oakland A's, and the other was Jim Woods, who worked with Bob Prince on the Pirate broadcast. And they said, we're not quite ready to make a decision yet, so we're going to let you go on back to your hotel and pack your stuff up and go on to Indianapolis, and we'll be in touch. And I said, okay. So I went back to the hotel, and I'm in the process of getting my stuff together, and the phone rings, and they said, we've changed our minds. We want to bring you back to the ballpark and offer you the job. I said, okay. So I go back to the ballpark, and they lay out the deal. It's a 3-year contract, but it's really not. It's a 3-year contract, and the club has a 1-year option. That means if they didn't like my work, they can show me the door. So I understood all that. And they offered me the money, and the money was not great. It wasn't a whole lot more than I was making in Norfolk, but I've been working a whole lot less to come here. So they laid it out, and they said, what do you think? I said, I'll let you know. And Wagner got mad, and that was the first tip-off that I knew me and Dick were not going to see eye to eye about a lot of things. And he said, well, what the hell is it that you don't like about this deal? I said, well, to begin with, I'm not accepting any deal unless I go back to Virginia Beach, where we were living, and talk to my wife about it, and then I'll let you know. Well, then he was kind of taken aback. Well, he couldn't get mad at that. And he said, well, then he, rather meekly, he said, well, when can you let us know? And I said, we're flying back to Norfolk on after the game tomorrow night. Or it was tonight. Yeah, it was tonight. And then I'll be able to call you tomorrow afternoon. They said, that's fine. So I go back to Virginia Beach. We talk it over. And I take the job. And reported for duty the 1st of February, 1974. And I had to stay in a hotel for, I guess, a month or so before I left to go to spring training, because I was carried everywhere in God's earth for 30 days Talked to Bill Moeller, got interviewed by Bill, went to Dayton and talked to Cy Burek and Ritter Collette and all the writers and TV people in Cincinnati and Dayton, and just for them to get a chance to know who I was. And then I was off to spring training the 1st of March. And I think it was the first time, quite honestly, I think it was the only time that I ever doubted my ability to do a job, because I was a huge fish in a small pond in Virginia. I did Virginia Tech football, and I did baseball and basketball, and I had the biggest job in Virginia. And now I come here, and everywhere I went, people say, boy, you got a tough act to follow. You following Al Michaels. And I thought, and there were nights I thought, I don't know what the heck I took this job for. And thank God for two people especially. And that was Sparky Anderson, but number one was Joe. I mean, I could spend this whole hour and a half or whatever it turns out to be talking about the relationship that he and I had. But when I went to spring training, I'm following him around like a puppy dog, because I don't know what the routine is. Once you learn a routine for whatever new job it may be, then you're on your own. You're good. But I had no idea. I'd never been in a big league baseball camp before in my life. But I had a lot of people pulling for me, and Joe was number one. Sparky was great, but the guys like Rose and Bench and Perez and Morgan, all those guys came to me and said, look, we'll do anything we can to help you. Whatever we can do to make it easier for you. And I don't think it was like that with a lot of teams. But they truly wanted me to succeed, even though they loved Al, and everybody had a great relationship with Al. And so it made things for me a whole lot easier. And then, then we lead up to the first broadcast of the year, and it's in spring training in Bradenton against the Pittsburgh Pirates. And I felt when the game was over, given everything into consideration, my first big league broadcast, scared to death, it came out pretty well. And so the following day, we have our home opener at Al Lopez Field in Tampa against the White Sox. And as uptight as I was the day before, that's how loose I was the next day. I felt like I'd climbed a mountain and had succeeded. And I go on the air that day when the engineer, I'll never forget, his name was Kenny Kimball. He's been going a long time, but he did a lot of our games in Florida. And he cued me, and I said, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Reds Baseball from Al Michaels Field in Tampa, Florida. Devastated. I was so embarrassed. That shows you what your psyche will do. And we go to a commercial break, and Joe said, I can't believe it. He said, we have not seen one pitch of the regular season, and I got material for the banquet circuit next fall. And so I knew it was a matter of time before Al heard about it. And all the writers, well, we had a writer who covered the club for the Cincinnati Enquirer, who now is a sports editor of the paper in Morgantown, West Virginia, Bob Herzl, who was a great baseball writer. And he and Al were like that. And I guarantee you, within 10 minutes after I'd said it, he'd been on the phone to call Al in San Francisco and tell Al what I did. And so I used to hear a lot of that crap from Al Michaels. But it was just something that was the furthest thing from my mind, was now I'm succeeding Al Michaels. I felt like after the first day I had succeeded Al Michaels, and I'd won that battle. And then the season begins, and by the time we came home, had roughly 30 games under my belt, and I was really comfortable. Now we come home, and we had the terrible tornadoes the night and day before in Piqua and in Sailor Park in Cincinnati, and all the devastation. And then opening day, April 4th, was just picture perfect. It was beautiful, not a cloud in the sky. And the baseball world was on its ear because the Reds were playing the Atlanta Braves, and Henry Aaron was one home run away from tying Babe Ruth's all-time record. And Vice President Gerald Ford was there to throw out the first pitch, and people have asked me, were you nervous about the possibility of calling Aaron's record-tying home run? I said, no, I wasn't nervous about that. I was nervous about being in a ballpark with 55,000 people before that I'd never seen. And so, I'm sure most of you know the story. 4 batters into the first inning that I ever broadcast that meant anything, Aaron tied Ruth's record when he hit a 3-run home run off Jack Billingham. And I've heard the call a million times. And guys in my profession, they don't need to be told that they screwed something up or what they just said was okay. And what I felt like the call was pretty good. I didn't stumble over my words, and I was proud of it, given the fact it was my first game, and it was a monumental moment in the history of baseball. And when the commercial break came, Joe said, "What the heck do you do for an encore?" I said, "I don't know." And I don't know if anybody's broken into my profession in such a historic way as I was fortunate enough to break in the way I did. It made for an incredible day. And I've often said, and I'll say it till the day I die, when people ask me who the all-time home run king is, I say Henry Aaron. And I'll stand by that till I die because he did it clean. There were no performance-enhancing drugs involved in it. And he went through hell and back in all the threats and everything that went into a black man about to tie and soon break one of the records that most people felt would never be broken. And then the controversy as to whether or not he was going to play anymore in the series, because they played 3 games here, then they were going to go to Atlanta to play the Dodgers and their home opener. And the commissioner had to step in and say, for the good of the game, he had to start 2 of the 3 games. The second game in which he started, if they wanted to let him go to the plate one time to bat and take him out, that was fine. And then he did not have to play the third game. Now, they could have broken it up any way they wanted to. He could have played the first game, set out the second, played the third. And that worked fine. And I understood exactly where Atlanta was coming from because they wanted him to break the record at home. And they had the ballpark sold out. Fulton County Stadium had been sold out forever. And to his credit, he was a man who was able to rise to the occasion. He hit the home run that broke the record on Friday night against the Dodgers and a left-hander, Al Downing, to become the all-time home run king. And, the years in which Joe and I worked together, numbering 31, and all the good things that have happened to me from the halls of fame and all the other stuff, the thing that I was most proud of was the fact that the 31 years that he and I had worked together equaled the longest that any 2 guys had ever broadcast big league baseball, ever. The other pair was Vin Scully and Jerry Doggett. Thank you. And the longer we worked, the closer we got. I've told the story a million times about how we used to get mail at Marty and Joe's Cincinnati, Ohio. Are you kidding me? And it was little things like that that impacted my thinking and made me realize that whatever we were doing right. And people were getting it. I ran into the postmaster one day during Christmas, walking around downtown Cincinnati, and we were standing there talking. I said, by the way, let me ask you a question. This Marty and Joe Cincinnati, Ohio on envelopes, that ain't legal, is it? He said, look, we know who Marty and Joe is in Cincinnati. We didn't need an address. All we did was just send it on down to the ballpark. And that's when I told Joe, I said, we must be doing something right. And I say that not in a manner that would make you think that a lot of the things that we talked about and a lot of the things that we did were contrived, because they weren't. There was nothing that we said, hey, this would be a good topic to talk about, and maybe people will get a kick out of that. Everything we talked about was spontaneous, things that happened. It was the meanderings of 2 left-handers who were slightly off center. And but more important than that, I watched how Joe handled people, and I was just amazed at all the years that we were together. That I never had one person ever say anything negative about him. I tell people all the time, when they talk about sports histories in Cincinnati, and you hear names like Oscar Robertson and Pete Rose, I said the biggest sports celebrity in the history of this town is Joe Nuxhall. That nobody ever uttered a single word of negativism about him. And he had a great way with people. I'll never forget when Joe had heart problems and was in the hospital. I only know when it was a million years ago. And I'd go to, and you couldn't see the walls, you couldn't see the ceilings, and there were flowers everywhere and cards and letters. This is before social media and the internet and cell phones. And he was genuinely perplexed. I said, "Are you kidding me? You have no idea." He had no ego. He was completely void of ego, constantly being told by people how much they loved him every day, every single day. And I said, "Joe, you have no clue how people feel about you in this town." He said, "I'm just amazed that people would send me flowers and send me all these cards." And he was legitimate. I mean, everything that came out of his mouth was legitimate. Some good, some not so good. But we, when I took up golf in 1995, that really was the thing that springboarded everything, because we'd be on the road, and one of the two of us would rent a car, and we'd go to bed at 10 o'clock at night and get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and go play golf. And Joe, we had to get back by 12 because Joe had to take a power nap every day before we went to the ballpark. But we had a wonderful time. I mean, it was so good that I could start a sentence and I could stop it in the middle and he could finish it, and vice versa. And I remember when toward the end when he got sick, and I went on this is a tough part for me, but we had a baseball cruise, Provident Travel. And in fact, we still have it. We're going to do our 40th annual baseball cruise in November with Herb Rosenfeld and his people. And we were going down earlier that week, Joe and I played golf together at Kenwood Country Club. A couple of guys at a sports auction had outbid everybody else to play golf with Joe and me. And so we picked this date in November. And it was a perfect day, 55 degrees, and beautiful day. And Joe was not real strong. And so he couldn't play 18 holes, but he would ride around, and he was one of the great storytellers of all time. Just incredible recall of something that might have happened 70 years ago. And he'd be right 99.9% of the time in every point that he made relative to this particular story. But he would hit a golf ball every now and then, and he'd tell stories. And we finished 9 holes, and I said, "Well, look, let me take you back to your van and going back to Fairfield and lay down and rest for a while." He said, "No, I told these guys I was going to be out here for 18 holes, and that's what I'm doing." And so we get to the 14th tee box, and we're sitting there, and neither one of us were very, I don't know how you say it, but we never told each other we loved each other. We intuitively both knew that the other did. We knew that. But we didn't like to get involved in stuff like that. And so we're sitting there in the cart, and he said, "We had a good time, didn't we?" And I said, "Yep, we had a hell of a time." And I had a sense then that he knew that this was the last time we were ever going to see each other. And so we finished playing, and I took him back to his van, and he drove back to Fairfield, and I went back to Anderson Township. And that weekend, I left to go on this cruise down what they call the Mexican Riviera. We sailed out of L.A. and went down the coast. And I had service in the Pacific Ocean. And I really don't know why I did that, but things work out. And so I go to bed that night, first night on the ship, and I wake up at 1 o'clock in the morning, and my message light was on in my stateroom. And I picked it up, punch a message button, and the voice at the other end was Rob Butcher, who was the Reds media relations director, who, as a matter of fact, is just now retired. And all he said was 911. And in my half-sleep condition, that didn't mean anything to me. I went back to sleep. And at 6:30 the next morning, a dear friend of mine, John Burns, who was with Cincinnati Bell at the time, and he called me, and he's talking about Joe, and all of a sudden he realized, and he said, "You don't know, do you?" And I said, "I don't know what." He said, "Joe died last night at 11:30 or thereabouts." And so I remember coming to Fairfield High School for the wake, but before that, the last broadcast we had together. And it was, again, there was something that we didn't talk about. We go through an entire season, and we know that the last game that season will be the last time that he and I work together. But we did not want to face it and talk about it, so we didn't. So we get to the last game of the season, and we go through the game, and now we get to the post-game part of the broadcast. And now the time has come. And I start in, and I could not get through it. And he said, "You need some help, don't you, little buddy?" That's what he used to call me. And I said, "Yeah, I need some help." And so we talked it through, and we got off the air. And I used to kid him all the time. I said, "I've never seen anybody like you." And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "You can cry at door openings. You can cry at the sun coming up." I said, "I've never seen anybody like you. God bless you, Kim, wherever you're sitting, you're just like your old man." And I thought that back then, the last thing in the world I would do would be to shed a tear, because men simply didn't do that. And I'm here to tell you that the older I've got, men damn sure do that. And that's I guess that's one of the many things I learned from him. But other than a massive temper, and I only saw evidence of that a couple of times. Everything he told me was good. I mean, I just shut up and I listened when he talked. He knew everybody in baseball. Everybody loved him. But I could light him up like a Christmas tree. I'll never forget, we played golf in Pittsburgh one day at a place called Rolling Hills, and we finished playing. We were putting our clubs in the trunk of the car, and I turned to him, and people are coming and going and getting out of cars and parking next to us and everything. I said, "You know what?" He said, "What?" I said, "You don't know how to spell the word etiquette as far as golf is concerned." And I mean, he lost his mind. And people are seeing this guy 270 pounds and this little guy weighed 155, and they said, "He's going to kill that boy. That's what's going to happen." We've run out of time, and I could go all night. Believe me, I could tell you stories that this is a labor of love for me, and we're halfway through it. And I'm sure I haven't touched on a lot of the things that maybe some of you folks want to ask questions about, and you'll have an opportunity to do that. When after we take a brief intermission, they're going to have a box out there that you can write your questions on, and Amanda will be, that's a boss. Marty goes nowhere until you, unless I'm with Amanda, you'll get to meet her shortly. And if you have any questions you want to ask her about what a wonderful life it is living with me. Thank you very much. We'll be back in a bit. Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me introduce Amanda.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here. It's been a pleasure to, I told him, be concise. These questions are all important. Be concise. He wasn't really concise in his stories, but the Joe stuff was priceless. So I'm glad you went a little long, babe.
You ready?
Yeah, you want me to just jump right into it?
I can't read them.
This is a great question. Clark from Columbus
Yes, Clark.
asked, Marty,
Yes, Mark.
your
Clark.
brackets,
My
how we
brackets.
looking?
That's a sore subject, Clark.
I always
No,
beat him.
I've all my Final Fours are still alive,
And your Tar Heels won.
and my Tar Heels won tonight, beating Michigan State. They're probably destined to play Arizona for the right to go to the Final Four, and Arizona's star player is a kid that left Carolina this year and went to Arizona to play, so that could be interesting. But I'm not bad. Thank you for asking.
Lots of questions on here about Joe,
Certainly.
which we talked about a lot of them. But before we get to a lot of the Joe questions, let's talk about a current player, used to be a current player. Kenny from Hamilton asks, was it a good decision to let Joey Votto walk? And will he make the club coming out of spring training in Toronto?
I thought it was a great decision the club made, and that's a sore subject for me also, because I think Joey put the club in a bad position, and that is, and people have raised Cain in the aftermath of the club not exercising the option to bring him back next year at this year at $20 million. Are you kidding me? And why they didn't do things for him. They would have done everything for him had he announced before the 2023 season that was going to be his last year. You can't very well honor a player whose intentions are to come back and play next year, whether it's for you or whether, in this case, it's the Toronto Blue Jays. So I don't have a problem at all with what the Reds did. And I think it's unfortunate that his insistence has been so great that he needed to play somewhere else in 2024, because if you look at his record the last 2 years, he should have been retired after the 2022 season and didn't. So I don't have a problem with that. I don't really believe, unless he's really sped up his workouts to be ready for opening day in Toronto, I kind of feel like he's going to start the year at their AAA club, and then they'll bring him up to the big leagues. I guarantee you he'll be with a big league club, and it won't be long, because they certainly didn't sign him to keep him in the minor leagues for the 2024 season.
Very good. Todd is talking about Adam Dunn. He saw the Grand Slam walk-off against Cleveland. I don't have any idea when that was.
I think I got a hernia that night.
Well, what's your favorite? What's your most favorite walk-off that you've seen? I can name probably your number one.
Oh, my favorite is the
Jay
one
Bruce.
that Jay Bruce hit to send them into the postseason. That was in 2010, 2000. One year
12,
runs.
10, I don't know. They all run
You get
together.
81 years old, you don't even know what day it is.
Let's see. Here's a golf question for you from Ed of Ross.
Okay,
He
okay,
wants to know if you and Joe
Yes.
would have beaten Billy Hatcher or Ronnie Oster in golf.
Well, if you'd have said, when you said Billy Hatcher, I'd say, well, I've got half of that group, but we're in deep trouble with half, because Billy's not a bad player. But then you dropped a Ron Oster on me, we'd probably give them a real run for their money. Ronnie would drink himself off the course.
Correct.
The two guys that I've known in my lifetime that drink more beer than anybody I have ever seen in my life.
Number one,
Kenny Anderson. Unbelievable. And almost as unbelievable as Ronnie Oster.
Agreed with
Yeah.
both of those. Okay, so what about, we just had an event a couple weeks ago for Maddie's house, and we did a roast on Marty Brennaman. There's a question here from Debbie from Mount Washington. She wants to know what your favorite joke was. I do need to preface, we couldn't hear all of the jokes. We got to go back and listen to it. Right. But do you have a favorite joke or a favorite roaster that you want to share?
No, we had some guys that were really good. I mean, Scott Sloan was good. course, Josh Need was at the he was the last guy up there, and being a professional comedian, he was spectacular. Tim Kremchek amazingly was. He was really good. Somebody had to write his material because he's the most unoriginal guy I've ever been around. I hope that gets back to him. He's one of my dear friends. He really is. It was an incredible event. And this is a commercial because of the work that Steve and Julie Raleigh do when they lost their daughter through suicide and started this foundation. They are just absolutely committed to this, and the event was spectacular. The cooperation that we had from the people that were involved, from Bob Costas, who sent a video message, and all the way down to the last person on the dais. It was a spectacular event, one of the memorable nights in my life, and I think they raised over $600,000 for Maddie's house.
Okay, let's go back to Joe, and let's just knock out all these Joe questions.
Okay.
Do you think Joe Nuxall ought to be in the Baseball Hall of Fame due to his lifetime devotion to baseball? Ted of Hamilton asked that question.
He should have been. I think I was hoping that we'd go in together as broadcasters, and obviously that didn't happen. That would have been the fulfillment of a dream for me, because that's never happened. There's never been two guys that worked together as broadcasters that went in as a team. There's one now that maybe one day down the road will, and that's Dwayne Kuiper and Mike Krukow with the San Francisco Giants. But there was nobody. They could talk about Jack Buck and Mike Shannon all they want to, but nobody, I think, had a greater camaraderie, not only as knowledgeable baseball people, but two guys who I think people could tell within listening for 10 minutes that they were dear friends, one to the other. And I think that was important. So I felt like definitely, and unfortunately now, out of sight, out of mind. That's unfortunate the way it is. I know the Cardinals have pushed like the dickens to get Mike Shannon in, and I don't think that's ever going to happen. Mike recently passed away, and the longer time goes by, the less chance that a person has. But I really felt deep down that Joe and I could have done it together, or at least in Joe's lifetime.
And what do you think made you and Joe such a great announcing team? Travis of Westchester asked that question.
We're two left-handers. We're both nuts. It's I don't know. It's just there was a certain chemistry that we developed sitting down next to each other for 31 years together, and I learned through many years that that's the one sport where you have a partner, whether you're doing basketball or football or whatever the case, and you work with the same guy. But it's more important in baseball because you're not doing, 16 or 18 games like the NFL or 84 like the NBA. You're doing 162 games. And if you don't like the guy you're working with, it's like going to work and it's a hell on earth every day. And we genuinely look forward to going to work because we liked each other. We dined with each other. I got to tell that story now.
Lots of
This
questions.
is the Chicago restaurant story.
Oh, this is good, though. This is good. You should hear this.
Kim knows this is coming, too. We play in the Cubs, and my daughter Dawn lives up there. So when we go to Chicago, we would go to dinner with Dawn and her family, and they would be the nights that Joe would go to dinner, and more often than not, he'd go to dinner by himself. And so we have that night off after an afternoon game. The next morning, we get on the bus to go to Wrigley Field, playing the day game, and he gets on the bus. He said, "You'll never believe what happened last night." I said, "Well, knowing it's coming out of your mouth, I probably won't, but go ahead." He said, "I went to the Saloon, which was a restaurant around the corner from the hotel. Nice steakhouse. Unfortunately, it's no longer there, but it had a baseball theme to it. And he said, I'm sitting there having dinner by myself, and I look up and I see this young guy walking across the dining room. And he comes over and he said, Mr. Nuxall, can I sit down?" And Joe said, "Sure." And so he said, "I just want you to know that I was born and raised in the Cincinnati area, and I grew up listening to you and Al, and then you and Marty." And he said, "I wanted to be a Reds player one day." And he said, "I just didn't have the talent. But I saw you sitting over here, and I just wanted to come over and tell you how much I appreciate the work that you all have done over these years as far as the Reds are concerned. And he said, you'll never guess who his mom and dad are. I said, who? He said, Nick and Nina Clooney. I said, wait a minute. Well, whenever I came at him like that, then he gets defensive. He said, what do you mean, wait a minute? I said, did you get his first name? I don't know what the hell his first name was. I said, would you know it if you heard it? He said, well, how would you know? I said, could his first name have been George? That's who it was. Honest God, honest truth, honest truth. I said, Joe, you happen to be talking to one of the top 2 or 3 most powerful people in motion pictures. I don't give a damn who it was. That's the gospel truth.
And that might go into what's your most memorable moment with Joe. I mean, everyone here kind of wants to know that. I mean, there's so many great stories like that you have that he shared with you, and that, I mean, from road trips and spring training, and I've heard so many of these stories. But what's your most memorable?
Well, the best one I can't tell.
I know. Right.
The Nuxall family will know that one too. I can't,
I really like, tell him the story about Joe getting stuck on the fence.
Oh, this summer, they had the
Field of Dreams
the
game.
Field of Dreams games the last 2 or 3 years in baseball. Well, they're not going to have that this year because 2 guys from Chicago bought property, and they're going to make an incredible sports complex that are going to appeal to young people, and will be bringing people in, the teams to play from all over the Midwest in the summertime. They're building a hotel there. So this year, there's going to be a major league game in Birmingham, Alabama at Rickwood Field. And Rickwood Field has been declared a national, whatever they call that. Yeah. And they can't touch that. It's going to be there for all time. It's a throwback. If you walk into the ballpark, it's all wooden. It was a ballpark that was played and very popular back in the 20s and 30s and 40s. And they've maintained it through all these years. And they're going to play a major league game there this summer. Well, there was a strike back in the 90s in baseball. And Joe and I were sent to Birmingham to do a weekend series between Birmingham and the Chattanooga Lookouts. Chattanooga was our AA farm club. And we go down there. Interesting, because Terry Francona was manager of the Birmingham team, and Michael Jordan was on that team. So now we do a Friday night game, then we got a Saturday night game, and so Joe, who played 1 season at Rickwood Field after he broke in at 15 here, and then they sent him out when he graduated from high school. His first pro stop in the minor leagues, I believe, was Rickwood Field in Birmingham. And so he said, why don't we go there and see the ballpark? And I said, I'm up for that, because I love to go to old ballparks. So we go over on Saturday morning. The thing is enclosed in a high chain link fence, and the fence was locked. It was Joe and me and Yid, Dave Armbruster, our engineer. And so Yid said, well, we can climb that fence. I said, I'm good for that. I can do that. Joe said, well, yeah, I think I can. So Yid goes over, I go over. The fence is probably 12 feet tall. And we get over the top and get inside the ballpark. We're not supposed to be there, but we're there. Joe climbs, had no problem getting over. Go into the ballpark, walk on the field. Joe's telling stories about when he was a 16 or 17-year-old kid playing there, being away from home for the first time. So now it's time to go. Concerned now that somebody had alerted the police that somebody was in this ballpark. And this thing was hallowed ground in Birmingham. So we get up, Yid goes over, I go over, Joe goes up and gets stuck at the top. I said, Joe, you got to get unstuck. We got to go. He said, I'm trying like hell, but I can't. I said, well, I got news for you. You got 5 minutes, and we're out of here. So it was touch and go for a while. He said, you wouldn't have left me, would you? I said, right now. He got over it. Everything was fine.
Okay, a couple more Joe questions. Your Kroger commercials are classic with Joe.
We had some of the most incredible times. I was telling some guys tonight, there were certain commercials that we did, we do them on a yearly basis, and it was a major production. They would hire a major production house and have a huge truck and cameras, and we would fly, and 2 years we shot commercials at Kroger stores in Cincinnati, and we shot them all night. We would fly up from Tampa early one morning. He'd come to Fairfield. I'd go to my home in Anderson. We'd sleep for 4 or 5 hours and then get up, go to the Kroger store about 8 o'clock. They'd make us up. We'd start shooting about 9:30. We'd finish at 6 a.m. in the morning, get on a plane at 7 and fly back to Tampa. And it was grueling. I mean, because we'd shoot 3 or 4 commercials, but the worst was the one that we did in a home in Tampa. This very enterprising couple had young children. They wanted to see these kids see things that most kids never see that would enhance their knowledge of a lot of different subjects. So they leased their house over to a production company that was shooting these commercials. And it was unbelievable. I mean, we had every imaginable thing that would hold up planes flying overhead and guys cutting their grasses next door, and
They had to pay him to quit cutting
they had
the
to
grass.
pay a guy $25 to stop cutting grass. We were supposed to finish at 7 o'clock that night. We're shooting 4 commercials inside and outside, depending upon which commercial. We shot the last scene for the last commercial at 2:45 the next morning. And I mean, it was brutal. But
Why did it take so long? We do our Lars Lean in like 4 hours.
It's a little bit more tedious than Laura's Lean commercials.
Maybe it was the talent.
And maybe what?
Maybe it was a talent. I don't miss my lines. Marty can mess up sometimes, and I can only assume, knowing Joe for a little while,
Yeah, I know.
he may have messed up a few lines.
I'm an old man now. I was a young man then. I was on top of my game, too.
You thought you were. You thought. I think this might be the last kind of question about Joe. What do you remember, if anything?
Joe. What?
Cheers to Joe. About him telling you about his early days in Hamilton, or
Well, you know, I was fascinated by his stories about coming up because of his brothers and the athletic ability that these guys had and how good the old man was. And in talking about when he broke in, you know, that day, that fateful day against the Cardinals, when Bill McKechnie looked down the bench and said, hey, you go down and warm up. And Joe's looking around and said, who the hell's he talking about? You know, but you wouldn't get a whole lot out of Joe because Joe was so void of ego. I mean, Joe wouldn't tell you he was all-state in 2 or 3 sports. He wouldn't tell you that scholastically he was one of the greatest athletes in the history of Greater Cincinnati. You'd have to get that from other people. And I got it from other people. Then people would say, you have no idea what an athlete. Well, I said, well, I knew he was a good baseball player. He said, you have no idea how good he was in everything. So he would, every now and then, he would get off on a story. And after I'd been properly schooled over a period of years and how good an athlete he was, then I would force him to talk about his athletic career. And he didn't like to talk about it because he didn't believe in bragging about himself. And he would not do that.
Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. Any classic faux pas that you made on the air?
Ooh.
Sarah from Cincinnati wants to know that. There's things you probably can't talk about, but I don't know that it made it. Yeah, a couple of them made it on the air.
Huh?
A couple of the bad words made it on the air.
Same word.
Yeah. The big one.
4-letter word.
Yeah, the big one.
Directed at the same person.
I know, that's impressive.
2 years apart. No, I can't tell those stories.
How about favorite banana phone call?
Oh, I can talk about the last one.
Oh, that was bad.
You know, I'd come home and we'd have rain delay, and we'd go to the banana phone, and I'd come home, and Amanda said, "How in the world can you talk to people?"
I
like
would text you
do on the
that. Be
telephone?"
nice. Be nice.
And somebody would say something that would make me PO'd so bad I couldn't see straight. Because these guys, young, especially the young guys, they'd be drinking all night. And so they say, let's call on the banana phone. And so they'd call, they'd have the radio turned up so loud there would be feedback coming through the radio and the phone. And you'd hear that high shrill. I'd have to say, son, do me a favor, turn your radio down. And so I developed a real negative approach to the whole thing. But we had funny ones. The night that Jose Rijo called, and that was another deal with Joe. Yeah, Rijo called and talked about, and here's a guy, he's Latin American, and he's got a definite accent. And he called Joe about Marty and Joe's potato chips and how greasy they were. He didn't like them. And Joe got all bent out of shape, and I'd have to reach over and tap him and say, Joe, that's Jose Rijo.
Well, you didn't know it was Adam Dunn.
No, after a while I did.
What did he ask you, if you were wearing a shirt?
Yeah, he said, do you have your shirt off? Oh, but the night that ended it, we were playing the Pittsburgh Pirates, and they had an outfielder named Andrew McCutcheon. And this guy called and said, I'm going to try to clean this up now. The guy said, is it true that he straps himself to his leg? Are there any Reds players that do that? Now,
Marty made the
we
fatal
have
mistake.
a 7-second delay on such as that. But I ruined the delay because I commented. And when he said it, I was so shocked that I said, what did you say? And when I said that, the 7-second delay went away. And the guy said it again. Now I'm infuriated. And now we get off, and I'm raving like a maniac. We went to a commercial break. I said, it's the last time we're ever doing this. We're never doing it again. I'm done with this. I've had it up to here. So the next day, unbeknownst to me, I talked to Paul Doherty, who was a columnist for the Cincinnati Enquirer, who's a dear friend of mine. And I'm railing to him at the ballpark that night. I said, this ain't never happening again. I'm not going to be a part of this crap again. He had lunch the next day with Bob Castellini, and he told Bob, he said, Marty said, he's done with that. And Bob said, oh, no. He said, that's a very popular feature. And Doc said, yeah, I think it's really good. So I go home the next day, and I get a call from Doherty. He said, you're not done with this. I said, yes, I am. He said, no, I had lunch with Bob Castellini, and he loves the feature, and I told him I thought it was pretty good, too. I said, well, why don't you shut the hell up? You didn't need to tell him that. That's none of your business. So I met with Castellini. I said, Bob, you can do whatever you want to, but you get somebody else to do that. I'm not doing it. He said, you serious? I said, I'm dead serious. I said, half of them are nothing but idiots, and they're drunk, and I'm not interested in doing it. And to his credit, Bob said, okay, we're done with it. That was it. Banana phone history.
Kind of on the same line, Kip from Fort Thomas, Kentucky wants to know, what was your favorite person that you got emails from on the broadcast? Do you even remember a favorite person?
No, I'll tell you the most unusual. I mean, Ian and I were talking earlier tonight. I'd get calls from him from Wales. And obviously didn't know him at the time, but probably the most unique person that we heard from on a regular basis was a guy living in the shadow of the Kremlin in Moscow. And he was a Reds fan. And you know, I get a call like that, I'm thinking somebody's trying to put me on. So I started to ask him pertinent questions, and he had answers for every question I gave him. And he called us over a period of 1 or 2 seasons, without fail. Every time we had a rain delay, he would call. And then all of a sudden he stopped. I said, Putin must have got him.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so baseball is constantly evolving, Melinda Gullett asks. What's one aspect of the game, on or off the field, that you're most curious to see how it develops in the coming years?
Well, I want to see what the staying power of the analytics are. I'm not a big analytics fan, and I think that's a sign of old age and knowing how the game used to be. That, quite honestly, was one of the reasons why I decided to walk away, because the game became all about home runs and strikeouts and walks, and that's not what I remembered creating the love that I had for the game of baseball. I think we're starting to see the pendulum swing a little bit now closer to the middle again, because of the fact that the Reds led the National League in stolen bases last season. And I think a lot of clubs woke up to the possibility that if we start to pay attention to acquiring through trade or the draft or free agency, players that have speed, that can generate excitement on the base pass and force mistakes on the other team, then maybe we should think about that. And I think that's something that we may well see happen over the course of the next few years. There are a lot of things about analytics I don't understand. In fact, I tell this story all the time. The first year that Joe and I were working together, we were playing a spring training game, and we went to a press room at the ballpark to have something to eat for lunch before we went on the air, and I heard an old umpire by the name of Al Barlick. I'm sure many of you folks would remember him. He's one of the great umpires of all time, but even then, 74, he'd already retired as an umpire, but was a supervisor and traveling around looking at young umpires and grading them about what they needed to do to improve their craft. And I heard him complaining about the game and how it had evolved into something that he didn't like. And I told Joe, I said, why the heck didn't he retire? 35, 40 years later, that was me. So, I mean, I understand. I think people growing up today, and they don't know anything but exit velocity and all these terms that we never used before. Thank God I worked for people that never demand. I know broadcasters that are told by the higher-ups, you got to talk about analytics. And quite honestly, had I been put with that question, I probably would have said, I can tell you where you can put the analytics, because I'm done here. And fortunately, they allowed me to do it the way I wanted to do it. But it's just, every sport evolves into something. Right now, I think the baseball needs to improve to get back to close as they can to what it used to be. And if you don't think I'm right, then you ask yourself, why all of a sudden are they imposing new rules? All these rules are designed to speed up the game, to increase speed on the base pass, all the things that most of us grew up loving about the game of baseball. And baseball now is imposing rules on the players to force them to play the game the way it used to be.
And that kind of goes in with what Randy Witt of Delhi asked. You've seen so much baseball in your career. What's the biggest change you've witnessed in the game, and how do you think it's impacted the way we watch and enjoy baseball today? I think you sort of kind of answered that just now. Okay. So let's talk about you a little bit.
Already done that.
No, we're going to talk more about you, though. If you were commissioner of the game, though, what are the 3 changes that you would immediately make today?
Fire the commissioner.
Nothing else? You wouldn't change anything else?
That's the only thing I can think of.
Well, let me ask you this, Marty Brennaman. How did you know, Jeff Baker of Hamilton is asking, that you were accepted as a Cincinnati celebrity icon, Marty Brennaman?
You mean, when did I feel like I'd been accepted?
When did you know that you were accepted?
Well, I mean, I've often said this is the area that's the most provincial area I've ever lived in. Especially, and I don't know whether you old folks feel it out here in Hamilton and Fairfield, but in Cincinnati, if you were born on the west side, chances are that when you died 70, 80, 90 years later, you would die within 4 or 5 city blocks of where you were born. And I used to tell Pete Rose, I said, I could blindfold you and put you in the trunk of my car and drop you off the corner of 8 Mile Road in Clough Pike in Anderson Township, and you'd think you were in Siberia. You'd have no idea where you were. And he didn't disagree with that. And I think that, once you folks accept someone from the outside, it's like 2 brothers. I can call my brother the foulest thing that I can think of in my mind if we argue, but you better not do it. And I think the time I felt like I'd arrived was that twilight doubleheader they played against the Giants right after the All-Star break in '74. They'd had the 3-day break, and then the Giants came in for a twilight doubleheader. And in the first game of the doubleheader, they went to the 9th inning, and the Reds were down 13-9 and scored 5 runs in the bottom of the 9th inning, and the game was won when Perez hit a 2-run home run to straightaway center to win the game 14-13, and I lost my mind. And I found out later that people had called WLW radio all night long to hear my call of the game-winning home run. And I thought then, well, maybe I'm one of them now. Maybe I'm one of them. And an interesting thing, I think about this all the time. I heard people all the time say, well, the interesting thing here is 2 things about this town. One, if I say something that you don't understand, you're going to say, please? Please? What the hell's that mean? I found out, so now I never use that, but now I understand it. The other thing is, and I find myself doing this all the time, and I said, I am a Cincinnatian through and through because I've been here now half a century. Meet somebody, where'd you go to high school? It's unbelievable.
All right, Marty, what is your favorite sports call? Kelly of Cincinnati wants to know.
Favorite sports call?
Yeah.
Well, it's very timely. My favorite sports call was a shot that Christian Laettner hit to beat Kentucky.
That is not. Your favorite sports call, Al Michaels made that call.
I'm talking about the Laettner shot against...
I know, but I'm talking about that's not your
Laettner,
favorite one.
I mean, Al Michaels didn't make that call. I did.
I know that, but that's not your favorite call.
It is when I think about them poor Kentucky fans.
Oh, I didn't mean it. I didn't think this meant your
BBN.
favorite call. I didn't think it meant your favorite call. Like, what's your favorite sports call you've ever heard?
No, okay. My favorite all-time call would be Michaels' call in the winning
Do you
Olympic
believe in miracles?
hockey game. Do you believe in miracles? Yes. Yeah. That's my favorite of all time.
How about your favorite blooper?
You mind?
It says, what's your favorite blooper? Jen of Norwood asks.
I don't know.
Way to go, Jen. Way to go, Jen.
Jen, do you have one? If you got one you can think of, just let me know what it is. Okay, I can't think of a blooper. I can't.
They used to have really good highlight reels of all the bloopers.
Yeah, but I can't think.
You can't think of one. Okay, let's talk about a little bit since you have retired. Rosie, who has a great dress on, by the way, tonight, she wants to know, Marty, it looks like you're having your best life ever since retirement.
Bingo.
Are you?
Yes, unequivocally. As I tell people, nobody enjoys retirement like I enjoy retirement. And I think it was all born out of the fact that I was ready to quit. Not that I didn't like my job, and I still think I was on top of my game. 46 years is long enough. The club Phil Castellini tried to talk me into working 5 more years to do 50. I said, your daddy ain't got enough money to get me to do 5 more years.
This would be your 50th season.
This would be my 50th season,
Yeah.
or I'd be dead by now.
And she also asked, and is Amanda happy to have you around more now?
Yes and no.
Look, I think that's for me, though. It says,
I know,
yeah.
yes.
So I will tell you, as a diehard Reds fan from the 70s, I grew up in Eastern Kentucky and Ashland, Kentucky, and my parents made me come in to watch the 75 and 76 series. I was born in 1972. He and I have the same birthday, just 30 years apart to the day. I love listening to him work. There's nobody had the experience I had in sitting in a ballpark, wherever we were, with my headphones in, listening to Marty work. And the fact that he was my husband, I didn't think about it as my husband work, and it was Marty Brennaman doing a great job, and plus I get to go home with him at night. I was on the road a lot with Marty. We traveled most cities together. I miss him on the radio, but I'm thrilled that I get to have dinner with him every night. I'm thrilled that we get to travel and doesn't have to be Pittsburgh and Milwaukee, and we can go to London.
Thank God it ain't Pittsburgh.
I know. So that goes into the next question. What's your favorite major league city? Someone asked that
That's
question.
very tough.
Linda from
That's very
Cincinnati
tough.
asked that.
I don't know that I have a favorite.
Shea Stadium. Somebody said Shea Stadium.
Shea Stadium.
Somebody said that like a joke. They must know how much you hate it.
I said it on the radio the last year that the Reds and the Mets played at Shea Stadium. I said, if they will allow me to depress the plunger to blow up this dump, I'll pay my way to New York.
Which means a lot because Marty doesn't like to pay his way a lot of places.
No, he doesn't. There's a lot of them I like. One that I didn't like forever and grew to like the longer we went was New York. I really enjoyed going to New York because she and I started going to a lot of Broadway shows, and I enjoyed it. I love Boston. We didn't go there enough. I think Boston's spectacular. And I'm not a big fan of the city of Los Angeles, but I love Dodger Stadium. Love Wrigley Field in Chicago. Love the city. So I don't think I could pick one city and say that's my favorite city.
Okay. Last couple questions. Steve wants to know. He loved Gary Burbank.
Yes.
And who didn't? They love when he parodied you as Brenny Martin Man. Do you have a favorite memory of one of Gary's bits?
Gilbert Gnarly. The Right Reverend, what was his name?
I don't remember. Deuteronomy.
Yeah, Deuteronomy Skaggs. He was a brilliant guy on the radio. He's not in very good health right now, unfortunately.
Saw him a couple months ago.
Yeah, his wife and they live in Florida, and old age has caught up with him in a hurry. I had lunch with him, 5-6 months ago, and he was not well. But he was probably the single most entertaining guy in Cincinnati radio history. I mean, he was so good. Boy.
Okay, last question. I think I got through them all. This is your favorite memory or your most memorable experience as a Reds announcer and your most funny moment as a Reds announcer. Gail wants to know. And then we're going to have like some rapid fire stuff. So.
All right, the most entertaining thing, and if Joe were here, he would beat me to it. We had a rain delay for hours. The two things I hated worse than anything on earth was rain delays and extra innings. I hated them. And we had this long rain delay, and back then, this was at Riverfront, probably back in the early 80s. We'd have to interview people. We'd have to go find some baseball scouts or, the TV guy from the other club, and we just have to fill time, and it would go on forever. Well, we found out that Jonathan Winters was at the ballpark that night. He grew up in Springfield. His dad was president of a bank. Always came home. He used to ride around Los Angeles with a Cincinnati Reds pennant on his antenna and decals all over the car. And he was in the ballpark. Would we like to interview him? And I thought, boy, oh boy, this is a chance of a lifetime, because you talk about a guy who was a genius. And so he came in, and it was very pleasant. And he and Joe had met before. I'd never met him. He sat between Joe and me. I mean, it was torrential rain. And he immediately, not something he needed to think about, he adopted the persona of a retired major league pitcher by the name of Whip Willis, who went bankrupt when his used chicken ranch went under. And I mean, Joe was crying.
I think you can get it on YouTube. I think I've listened to that.
I think it's still around. I think if you punch up Jonathan Winters, Cincinnati Reds baseball, it may still be there.
So.
But it was absolutely a night of brilliance, and everything that came out of his mouth was a riot. That would probably be the funniest night. And what was the other part of it?
The most memorable experience. Gosh, you've had a lot of big memories.
I know. I don't know. We interviewed, what's his name, the vice president.
Dick Cheney?
Yeah, biggest jerk I've ever crossed paths with. And this guy thought he was a rock star. There ain't no fat rock stars. I was not a big fan of Dick Cheney's.
Well, speaking of like guests in the booth,
Yes.
we're going to do pick one segment with you. I'm going to say a couple names of like your better guests in the booth, and you're going to tell me who it was between President Bush or Macho Man Randy Savage.
Oh. I was a big fan of President Bush because he was awfully nice to me, and he sent me a nice retirement letter.
He did. He even mentioned my name.
Really
I thought
did.
that was kind of cool.
But Randy Macho Man Savage, that was one of the great moments in broadcast history.
Never broke character, did he? Never broke.
I had a buddy at work for the WWF who went through the sports administration program at Ohio U, which is the best sports ad program in the country on a college basis. And he had a big job, and he would travel with them. And they were coming into Cincinnati, and my youngest daughter, Ashley, she was 8 years old at the time, and she loved to watch him on television. So he called me and said, hey, we're going to be at Riverfront Coliseum next Thursday night. You want to bring Ashley down? I said, absolutely. We're playing a day game with San Diego, and we could just go over there. He said, would you like to have Randy Savage on the air? I said, heck yeah. So it was all set up, and I'm thinking, the rest of the match begins at 7 o'clock, whatever. Randy's going to come over in jeans and a body shirt and sneakers. He walks in there and looked like a mutant canary. He had shocking yellow outfit with a yellow cowboy hat and a cape and tight pants and a body shirt and shoes to match. And he comes down the stairs and sits between me and Joe, and he never broke character. He was the Macho Man. I'm trying to get him to talk about, because he played 1 or 2 years in the Reds farm system. His name was Randy Poffo. He had 17 home runs one year at Tampa, which was our Class A club in the Florida State League. He would not, you don't want to talk about baseball, he wanted to be the Macho Man. And it was entertaining, from the get-go. Joe loved it too.
All right, favorite Jeff Ruby hangout, the waterfront or the precinct? Did you hang out at those?
Lucy's in the Sky.
Oh, of course. That goes way back in the 70s.
You talk about on top of my game now.
Oh, heavens. And he acts like I care. I'm like, I was in grade school. I don't care what you were doing. Could care less. Who has the best use of a toothpick, Dusty Baker or U.L. Washington?
Nobody has a better treatment to a toothpick than John Dusty Baker.
But I have seen him. I was sitting, I'll never forget this. I was sitting right next to them. I don't know why I had that seat in Milwaukee one night. And he has these special toothpicks. They're in a special box.
From Australia.
Yeah, it's fancy. It's not like you go to Kroger and get a box of those 200 toothpicks for 99 cents.
At a grocery store.
I was watching him, and I'm literally this close to Dusty. He got it stuck. Yeah, and he finally just had to use his finger to flick it out. But, yeah. All right, favorite Clooney, Nick, Nina, George, or Rosemary?
I don't know. I didn't know George. I don't know George. I didn't know Rosemary. I've known Nick and Nina Clooney for a long time. And Nick's fascinating. He and his wife are going to go.
Maybe.
It's not 100%. But they're supposed to go on a cruise with us in November. And there's a guy that's got a wealth of talent and a wealth of stories about his days
90. He's 90 now.
In television in Cincinnati and Los Angeles. I've never met George.
All right. How about one of your favorite subjects? Favorite UNC basketball coach, Dean Smith or Roy Williams?
I'd have to say Dean Smith. And I have great love for Roy too. But Dean's a man. He's a man. He was a man.
How about former UK basketball announcer, Kaywood Ledford or Joe Dean?
Oh, Kaywood Ledford, hands down. One of the great college basketball announcers that ever lived.
3-generation baseball family, the Bells or the Boones?
No. Somebody apparently is thinking I give a damn.
He's retired. He can,
I would probably say families. I'd probably say the Boone family.
Most obscure Reds player, Sam Mahias or Sal Butera?
Oh, no question, Sal Butera. Sal couldn't hit water if he fell out of a boat. Sammy had a little bit. Sammy had some skills. Oh, Sal was a decent defensive catcher, but he was a lead pipe out.
How about your short-lived Reds manager who deserved better? Tony Perez, Jim Riggleman, or Pete McKinnon?
My favorite of that bunch?
Who deserved better? I mean,
who deserved better?
Tony.
Tony Perez did.
Yeah.
Now Jim Bowden got him. Most despicable person I've ever known in baseball.
If that was a question, who do you like least in baseball? It's Jim Bowden. How about your favorite Giamatti? Former baseball commissioner Bart or Oscar winner Paul?
Oh, I'm a big fan of Paul now. No, you know what?
But you like Bart Giamatti.
I loved his old man because that's when Joe and I were called to New York when they accused us of inciting a riot. That's when Dave Pallone was pushed by Pete, and we flew out to New York the next morning to go to New York to meet with first Giamatti, who was a National League president at the time, and then Peter Ueberroth, who was commissioner. And Giamatti was incredible. I mean, he was a guy who spoke, a former president of Yale University, who spoke the English language in a manner that none of us would understand what he's saying. He was so brilliant. But then he could get down and dirty with the best of them. And he allowed us to express our opinions about what happened that night. We didn't get into an argument with him. And then the almighty God, Peter Ueberroth, came in, who I'm convinced over the years has had perpetual broken arms from patting himself on the back about everything he ever did. So I was a big fan of both Giamattis. Although those of you who have not seen Paul Giamatti's latest movie, when he was a school teacher at a private school in New England, and the kids he had to take, what is it?
The Holdovers, is that right?
Unbelievable! It's such a good movie.
Okay, a few more. Favorite Carrie, Harry, Skip, or Chip?
Ooh.
That'd
be tough.
I love Chip.
I knew Harry pretty well, but not nearly as well as I knew Skip. Skip's passed away. And then his son, Chip, is like a second son to me. He and I have been so close over the years, and I've advised him on things, and I have great respect for him and his family. But Harry was wonderful to my son, Tom, when Tom worked with the Cubs, and Harry had a history of not treating young announcers very well at all. He didn't like them. But he really liked Tom, and he took care of Tom, and I was always indebted to him for that.
Favorite spring training sites? I know this is not the answer. Plant City, Sarasota, or Goodyear?
Well, there's a caveat to all of that. If you're in the baseball business, especially if you're players, nothing equals training in Arizona. Nothing. Not Florida, not anywhere. And I had to learn the hard way because when we left Sarasota, which I love dearly, love training in Sarasota, love the area, love being on the Gulf side. I went to Arizona kicking and screaming, but after spending one spring there, I realized what I had been told by some of the old-timers in baseball, that if you're going to be associated with this game, that's the best place to train. And as a matter of fact, it is. There's nothing like training in Arizona. And where we train in Goodyear is great. I mean, I love being there. We'd rent houses when I was with the club and would be out there for the whole time. Lately, we just got back Tuesday after being there 2 weeks. And we stay at the Wigwam Resort out there, which is really nice. But I'd say Arizona's the best place to train.
The most unlikely occurrence, Billy Hatcher with 7 straight World Series hits, or Scooter Gennett and his 4 home runs in a game?
Oh, Scooter Gennett's 4 home runs.
And you missed it. You were at home.
That's one of the great moments in baseball history I was not a part of.
I was there, but you were home.
I was home and watching it.
Yeah.
And when he hit his 4th, I said, "What the hell did you take tonight off for?"
Cycle, Eric Davis or Ellie De La Cruz?
I'd say from an exciting standpoint, De La Cruz. But as good as Eric could run, I don't know that Eric could run like this kid can.
And then the last pick one, best baseball brawl, Brandon Phillips and the Cardinals, or Amir Garrett versus the Pirates. But I've seen better ones than that.
Oh,
Totally
Amir
better
Garrett
ones
and
than
the
that.
Pirates don't even rate.
No.
That
I mean,
they-
he was going to take on the whole team, which is admirable, I guess.
I know, but that's nothing like watching
Like
Brandon
80s
Phillips
and-
go up to the plate and tap Yadier
Yadier
Molina,
Molina.
and then all hell break loose. That was a dandy. That was.
But
a
there's
dandy.
also been good ones, like Tracy Jones had a couple good
Tracy
ones.
Jones had one of the great ones of all time
Yeah.
against the Atlanta Braves in a relief pitcher by the name of Jim Aker. And Aker didn't want any part of him. And he found out why he didn't. That was a good fight, yeah.
Well, that is all the questions that we have on this sheet, I think. I think we covered everything. Do you have anything that you want to add?
Yeah, in closing, I'd like to say first, I want to thank Ian and Sherry Rowland and, again, all the folks that were involved in coming up with a decision to have me do something like this. As I said earlier, you know, when you're bearing down on 82 years old, you feel like you've done everything you could possibly do. This was completely different for me. It was a thorough enjoyment for me. It was a greater enjoyment that this event sold out. When I retired, Amanda and I talked about it. We own a place in North Carolina that we don't get to nearly as much as we'd like to because I have so much still going on in town. And maybe it's an ego thing, I don't know, but I felt like the one thing I wanted to remain here in Cincinnati was I wanted to remain relevant. I know some people who were great stars with this team that couldn't wait to leave and go somewhere else to California or Florida to play golf and be away from the city and all the fame that they acquired justifiably because of their talents in this town. Sooner or later, generations don't even know who the heck they are. And I like going into Kroger 3 and 4 days a week.
And it's
I
an
do,
hour and a
seriously.
half. You go in to get a roll of toilet paper.
And know the
it's-
names of everybody in my store and be around and be seen by people. I said the last day I was on the air, I'm going to be around. If you see me, come up and talk to me. And I meant that from the bottom of my heart. And that had to do with this town and these people and people like you all. And so of all the places I could have gone in Major League Baseball to work that I could have been hired, I was blessed to come here. And I was smart enough to know that when I had the opportunity to go somewhere else, whether it be Boston or Chicago or New York or San Francisco or LA or wherever, on the 11th hour, I always said, no, I'm happy here. And I have been happy here. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good job, babe.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Amanda Brennaman and Mr. Marty Brennaman.